Catherine Moore, and I am back today to read and talk about the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church Safe Sanctuaries Policy. But first, before I begin, I have some exciting news. I don't know what will become of it, but to me, it's important and exciting. So I was listening to a podcast today about deconstructing from the Christian faith and the evangelical culture. And the person that, the founder of this podcast was Dr. Stephen Hassan. He has a PhD. He is a psychologist. And I messaged him and told him that we should talk. And he messaged me back. I told him that he needed to look at my content. And he messaged me back. And he's going to look at my content. I also gave him permission to share my content with anyone that he chooses to share my content with. And I had also told him I also wanted to unpack the generational trauma that has gone on in my family and my ancestors. I wanted to talk about the fact that I have ancestors who are famous for surviving a massacre, the Parker Massacre. And I have somewhat of an uncanny resemblance to Cynthia Ann Parker. When I look at her photo, I also see a resemblance to my mother and my maternal grandmother. And I relate to her. And there is a long history of generational trauma within my extended family and throughout my extended family. And I don't think it's an accident that I discovered that. And it was incredibly validating when I did discover that, because I did not expect to find that when I started looking into my genealogy. And the main reason why I looked into my genealogy is I wanted to be able to understand how I was related to Judge Morris Hassel, who was heavily involved with the Texas Annual Conference administration at one time. And that is how I discovered that I was also a descendant, and so was Judge Morris Hassel. We are both descendants of the Parker family that survived the massacre at Fort Parker in Texas. And so now I'm going to talk about the safe sanctuary policies. So let's get into it. This was revised in April 2025. And it's not quite as long as the sexual ethics policy or lack of sexual ethics policy for the Texas Annual Conference. This is 11 pages long. The policy for sexual ethics that I read was 24 pages long. The Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church Safe Sanctuary Policies for Conference and District Events. Effective June 1st, 2005, adopted June 2nd, 2004, revised April 2025. The first is the introduction. I read this probably a decade ago, so it's been a while since I've actually looked at the safe sanctuary policy. 1, the introduction. Our calling and our mandate is to ensure safe sanctuary for all God's people. Isn't that interesting? So I guess I'm not one of God's people. I mean, that would be the question I would have for the Texas Annual Conference, right? I mean, did they just get some kind of notice that I am not one of God's people? Is that why Gwen Adams said that any allegations of abuse that came from me were just hearsay? Is it because I'm not one of God's people? Is that why my sons had to watch me be sexually harassed at a United Methodist Church at supervised visitation? Because we're not God's people? Is that it? I'll continue. Throughout the Gospels, oh, I love this, when they start talking about the Bible. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus provides teachings on providing a peaceable kingdom for all God's people, including our children, youth, and vulnerable adults, unless you were sexually assaulted by a United Methodist minister employed by the Texas Annual Conference, then you ain't shit. The Bible verse that was quoted is Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, and then Luke chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. The peaceable income begins with sanctuary. And scriptures provide examples of how sanctuary is to be a community of protective nurture and harmony. Psalms, verse 20, chapter 1 through 2, chapter 20, verses 1 through 2, and 27, verses 4 through 5. Now, isn't that interesting? That sanctuary is to be a community of protective nurture and harmony. So where was the protective and harmonious nature in the supervised visitation when we were being followed to the restroom and violated and exploited in a United Methodist church, or when a parent showed up with a weapon and was allowed to return when there was a big sign on the door of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church stating weapons are not allowed? And I mean, where was the harmonious peace when I was being sexually harassed by a visiting parent in front of the staff of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church that is under the Texas Annual Conference administration? Oh, wait, I know. It's because I'm a surviving sexual assault survivor by a United Methodist clergy. So I don't matter. I don't really count. I get it. As Christians, we are called to create a safe sanctuary in our churches. Unless there's a preacher's kid in that sanctuary that was sexually assaulted by their parent, and you don't give a shit about them or their kids. So that they may be holy, safe, and protective, so that they may be holy, safe, and protective communities for all God's people, regardless of age or ability. Well, I guess that myself and my kids were not really considered God's people, especially when my sons had to watch me be sexually harassed during the supervised visitation. Therefore, as we practice our faith and fulfill our mission to serve Jesus Christ, the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church has developed the safe sanctuary policies as guidelines for protecting from the harm children, youth, and vulnerable adults, herein known as protected persons, involved in all conference and district events, activities, programs, which would mean the supervised visitation, domestic relations office of Harris County. That would fall under programs. Retreats, trips, and overnight functions, herein known as events. The supervised visitation under the Domestic Relations Office taking place at a United Methodist Church would be an event. And that policy is referring to events. The safe sanctuary policy applies to anything that takes place inside the United Methodist churches that are under the Texas Annual Conference administration. Now, I had a conversation with Elijah Stanzel years ago. See, Elijah Stanzel used to be a fly on the wall for the cabinet meetings. What does that mean? Well, that means that he was the treasurer of the Texas Annual Conference. And Elijah Stanzel told me himself that the staff of the Domestic Relations Office following visiting parents to the restroom was against the safe sanctuary policy. But of course, nothing was done about it. So instead, what they do, instead of following their safe sanctuary policy, they retaliate against me for exposing their incompetence in being able to follow their own sexual ethics policy and safe sanctuary policy. So now I can't see my kids, but guess what? Since I can't see my kids, I have all this spare time that I can talk about it. Gosh, I guess that muzzle didn't work, did it? Okay. Therefore, as we practice our faith and fulfill our mission to serve Jesus Christ, the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church has developed the safe sanctuary policies as guidelines for protecting from harm the children, youth, and vulnerable adults, herein known as protected persons involved in an, okay, I read that. The next one is going to be 2. Scope of conference policies. Okay, and this is the, let's see. This is the second page of the safe sanctuary policy. And next is 2, the scope of conference policies. These safe sanctuary policies shall be applicable to all Texas Annual Conference and district events involving protected persons. What a joke. Because nobody's protected, really. Because here's what's going to happen. In the event that it is reported that there was sexual misconduct, because for some reason, sexual misconduct is a broad term, which is more appropriate for clergy having affairs. That's a term that is more appropriate for clergy having affairs. People having affairs within the church, consensual sexual relationships. I don't care about that. What I care about is the misconduct where it is non-consensual. And I particularly care about that when it involves children. Why would I? Because I survived it. Okay. The policies and provisions herein shall apply to all persons, including all clergy and lay persons, paid and unpaid. Who have any direct or indirect contact with protected persons who participate in any events which would apply to the supervised visitation, sponsored by the Texas Annual Conference and or its districts. Further, each local church is required to adopt its own safe sanctuary policies for its congregation and submit the policies to its district office as part of an annual charge conference reporting. Now, I think this is just my opinion, so you can take it or leave it, because, I mean, what do I know? I'm the one in a cognitive decline, so you really don't have to take me that serious. Here's my opinion on saying that the congregations can come up with their own safe sanctuary policy. In layman's terms, that's bullshit. And I'll tell you why. Because it defeats the purpose of the United Methodist Church General Conference implementing these policies. If they're just going to say, well, we have these policies, but we're going to allow the congregations to, make up their own policy similar to this as they go. And just let us know what they decide to do. That's asinine. It really is. This is why they have their heads up their ass when it comes to victims being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted in churches, any denomination, including the United Methodist denomination. You're giving them a loophole, a way of, well, we have these policies, but you can come up with your own. What's the purpose then? What is the purpose in having a larger administration that, has these policies? What is the purpose in having annual conference every year and the bishop and cabinet going over these policies on the sanctuary floor? I mean, that's a waste of time and money. Okay. The policies and provisions herein shall apply to all persons, including all clergy and lay persons, and paid and unpaid, who have any direct or indirect contact with protected persons who participate in any events. I read that. Furthermore, each local church is required to adopt its own safe sanctuary policy. I read that. Local church events not sponsored by the conference or district, regardless of location, shall follow local church policies. What is the purpose? This is how the Texas Annual Conference Administration gets away with blowing off sexual assault victims within congregations under their administration. Which is funny because the Rio, Texas Conference is filing a lawsuit against 40 churches that would like to separate to be a part of the Global Methodist Church, but I won't go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole other conversation. And I definitely have my opinions on that and what should have happened with that. But I digress. No one has to take me serious because, clearly I'm in a cognitive decline, but that has been diagnosed by United Methodist clergy employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration, who are armchair psychiatry specialists. I'm going to continue. Definitions. All right, this is 3. Protected persons include child, anyone under the age of 12. Youth, anyone who is at least 12 years of age, 12 years old, but not yet 18. Or anyone who is 18 years or older and still in high school. Adult, anyone who is 18 years old or older who is not in high school and not a volunteer and not a vulnerable adult. Let's talk about a vulnerable adult in a minute. I'm going to finish this. Vulnerable adult, okay? Anyone 18 years or older who has either physical or mental limitations that makes them susceptible to abuse. Isn't that interesting? So wait a second here. I was told by Harrison Fisher that the Texas Annual Conference would retaliate and say that I was mentally ill, mentally incapacitated, and that I could not take care of our kids. That they would help my ex-husband, who is a child abuser, which is not a big surprise since the Texas Annual Conference has a history of employing child predators, one of them being my father. So, their lack of integrity and ethics is not a huge shock to me. And vulnerable adult. I was walking in to the supervised visitation at the United Methodist Church as a vulnerable adult for multiple reasons. 1, because I was falsely accused. 2, I was sexually abused by my father, who was a United Methodist minister that was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration, which is the same administration that is over St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. And nothing was done. This goes against the safe sanctuary policy. Oh, but wait, it was just me, and I'm not one of God's people. And I have a mental health diagnosis by Methodist clergy who, for some reason, felt that they were employed by the Texas Annual Conference because they're mental health experts. Right? I mean, a multi-billion-dollar administration employing clergy who are capable of sexually abusing children are also employing mental health experts. I mean, that's ludicrous. Where are the boundaries here? I guess there are none because they don't apply to them. Because ministers have a sense of entitlement. I know because I grew up around them. Personal caregivers who are subject to these policies include all clergy, including pastors, assistant pastors, etc., any adult employee or volunteer who supervises or engages in an event for youth, children, or vulnerable adults, teachers, Sunday school teachers, event leaders, group leaders, assistant leaders, and child care providers. Any adult, employee, or volunteer who works around any protected persons, janitors, and security guards. I'll let you in on another interesting fact. My mother worked for multiple United Methodist churches within the conference in the church nursery around children. And in 2017, she admitted to drugging me with codeine so that my father could sexually assault me. She worked in church nurseries at churches that were under the Texas Annual Conference administration. The safe sanctuary policy is garbage. It's a load of shit. Because Harrison Fisher said that the Texas conference would say that I was mentally incapacitated, too mentally incapacitated to take care of our sons. Especially since they hadn't been around my sons and myself that much. And he told me that they would help my ex-husband, who is a child abuser himself, that they would help him get our kids away from me, which I didn't understand at the time. That just confused me. Like, how does that happen? Now I know. Because I lost custody. And I had to visit my kids at supervised visitation at a United Methodist church that was under the Texas Annual Conference administration. The same administration that Harrison Fisher was warning me about for exposing them, for employing child molesters and placing them on assignment at their churches. And let me tell you that the Global Methodist Church, the Global Methodist Conference, they are not immune to this. Because there are a lot of clergy, including people in leadership roles in the conference, who have gone over to the Global Methodist Conference, who were a part of that. So they are not immune to the same thing happening. They are not immune to making the same mistakes that the Texas Annual Conference is making. And in these policies go against sexually harassing or violating or exploiting any vulnerable adult. And that is what happened to me at the supervised visitation at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. And not only that, or maybe I was the exception. Maybe they felt I deserved it because I was sexually assaulted. Because they are embarrassed by the victims of sexual assault. These people should be ashamed of themselves. And I am nowhere near stopping on this. I'm just getting started in telling my story and advocating for what happened to me. And I don't care how crazy or stupid anybody thinks I look. It is not going to shut me up.